Brahmins Practice versus Buddhist Practice by Venerable Rungruan Papa Saro, Dr. Rungruan Lim Chu Patapa. The Buddhist practice is composed of two parts, a samatha and vipassana. The difference between the two is that, in the part of samatha, it is to make the mind to become internally steady and concentrated by abandoning any arising disturbing unwholesome phenomenon in the mind, starting from mindfulness development and typically finishing after the fourth jhana of absorption with the development of purified mindfulness, and in this circumstance typically most of the rough defilements and the middle defilements are abandoned from the mind, and as a result the mind becomes very internally steady, composed, unified, concentrated. While in the part of vipassana, it is an insight observation on what is happening inside the mind, no matter whether it is wholesome or unwholesome, and studying on what it really is. An insight observation technique is a scientific way to observe, then investigating the nature of arising phenomena in the mind, processing so-called the process of dependent origination. The Buddhist practice starts with learning how to initialize a mindfulness, then we develop a skill to detect what is happening within the mind. We will learn that what action we doing is depending on the mind. As a matter of fact, if we have a mindfulness to be aware of how a mind is, either wholesome or unwholesome, then we will know exactly what kind of action will be taken. Therefore, a mindfulness is a very useful tool in monitoring an individual life, and by having a good morality, then having a mindfulness can be used in blocking any wrong action to the world. As proceeding on the next step of performing a mindfulness meditation, at this time we start with seeing a thought within a mind processing, and we can realize that these thoughts can be either wholesome or unwholesome of mental defilements. Then we begin to learn on how to abandon all the arising unwholesome thoughts, so that the mind will become steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. After doing so, we proceed on the absorption, and begin to detect even the initial thoughts at the beginning of the mind processing before it will become any kind of hindrance. Then we learn on how to apply a liberated thing with wholesomeness, and then the mind becomes in a deep steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated in the fourth jhana, and at this state of mind, the mindfulness will reach a special state of a purified mindfulness to detect on an individual instance of mental phenomenon without any bias on it. The samatha is a preliminary part of the Buddhist practice, and it serves the purpose of cleansing all the outer contaminants shelling the mind before dwelling into the inner mind. That is, after abandoning all the 5 hindrances, and then the initial thoughts, by now the mind is in an absorption, and it is ready to perform vipassana of an insight observation, seeing the process of dependent origination, so that we can clearly see a particular state of mind and the mind processing of dependent origination as a whole system for wisdom development. A significant difference in the part of samatha between the Brahmins practice and the Buddhist practice is that in the Brahmins practice, the mantra meditation will bring the mind directly into an absorption, while the mindfulness meditation in the Buddhist practice, all rough defilements and middle defilements of the 5 hindrances will be cleansed out, and then the mind will reach into an absorption with mindfulness, and the mindfulness will be improved for later performing an insight observation in vipassana. A brief comparison between the Brahmins practice and the Buddhist practice can be summarized as follows. The Brahmins practice, performing a mantra meditation or absorptive meditation by reciting a short sacred word, a mantra, then the mind dwells into an absorption. The mind will become internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated by the power of meditation. The practice will make the mind to be calm, but cannot abandon any defilements, ever the 5 lower fetters, because of the lack of mindfulness development. During the course of the Brahmins practice, although the Brahmins practice can bring the mind to an absorption, but it is an absorption without mindfulness development, and lacking a fundamental mindfulness to abandon even the 5 lower fetters, and then experiencing to have an eye to see the Dharma as it really is in the Buddhist practice. Later in the yoga practice of yogic Sanskrit, the practice tried to correct this problem by adding a mindfulness breathing into an absorptive meditation, but still trying to rush into absorption without emphasizing on having a mindfulness application to abandon all the 5 lower fetters along the course of thought to develop a sufficient skill so that later it will instantly be a proper liberated thinking to abandon an initial thought in the first absorption. It is important to understand that the Neo-Hindu practice does not have the part of an insight observation of Vipassana in the Buddhist practice, therefore as a result there are no wisdom development from the mind study and the wisdom study of the threefold study strategy for the cessation of the middle defilements and the finest defilements which are the ultimate achievements in the Buddhism. The Buddha's enlightenment stemmed from the fact that the Buddhist practice was an exploration of mind in an insight observation. Starting with the Buddhist practice by performing a mindfulness practice and development, then using mindfulness with careful attention on something wholesome such as Dharmapada of the Buddha's teachings on the truths of nature in order to abandon any disturbance from arising phenomenon within the mind, then the mind will become internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated, and then by keeping on abandoning the arising 5 hindrances of the middle defilements. All the defilements are cleansed off all the way along the course of thoughts till the initial thought. After all the 5 hindrances are completely abandoned, the mind will automatically dwell into the inner mind reaching a Buddhist absorption with mindfulness, then an arising initial thought will be corrected by liberated thinking and the mind will develop into a special condition of a one-pointedness with purified mindfulness, so called a purified mindfulness. This purified mindfulness will be firmly steady with no favor or unflavored to any arising mental phenomenon. After then the mind is ready to perform an insight observation on the process of dependent origination to gain an insight wisdom to be used in the cessations of all the finest defilements in craving, clinging, and ignorance, respectively. And after attaining insight wisdom, the mindfulness will be incorporated with wisdom to cope with all kinds of arising problems in the world. The Buddha suggested that while making an observation on each phenomenon in the insight of mind processing, we should apply the Four Noble Truths analysis for contemplating the Dharma to gain an insight wisdom of what is happening in the inner mind. In analogy to the scientific study, the early part of the Buddhist practice is like exploring the matter into the world of molecular level, where we may see the varieties of molecular structures forming up compounds. But when penetrating into the inner mind by performing an insight observation, by now we are getting deeper into the inner mind of the mind operating system where it is like penetrating into an atomic level of particle in quantum physics. This is a new reality of the world of life which is absolutely no self, but it is a natural process of being. An insight observation is the Buddhist pragmatic approach in an introspective learning on life by dwelling into the inner mind to explore the nature of mind, including phenomenon in phenomenon, phenomenon in body, phenomenon in feeling, phenomenon in perception, phenomenon in volitional formation, and phenomenon in consciousness in searching for the truths of life within nature. The Buddhism is a religion based on facts and science, and the way to assert the truths is by making a critical observation without any disturbing interference. The word an insight observation in Buddhism means having an observation on what is happening inside the mind so that we can cognize on the reality of life within nature. It is a Buddhist approach to observe the nature as it really is with wisdom. This is a Buddhist way to study on the Dharma, the truths of life within nature.